All right, so I've been using the Anbernic RG35XX for a few days, and I think I'm ready to give this thing a review. I have quite a few thoughts on it. Some are positive. Unfortunately, some are rather negative. So in case you missed the initial unboxing and first impressions, we will really quickly go around the device and do a quick hardware tour and maybe talk about some of my problems with the hardware. So you have a pretty standard Game Boy appearance, which I think is really what kind of drew me to this thing from the very beginning. I really do like the appearance of this thing. I did call out that I thought it was a little bit weird that the face buttons were glossy and the other buttons were matte, but that's something that's going to be totally preferential, and they may be referencing something in terms of like devices of years gone by. These are rubber membrane buttons, so they're not really clicky in any way. The D-pad is also a rubber membrane. We're going to talk about that D-pad a bit more later because I do have some problems with it. A, B, X, Y, start, select. There's a menu button that you can jump into to load and save your save states, exit games, so forth and so on. On the bottom, you have a headphone jack and then your charging port, which is a USB-C. On the side, you have two SD card slots, a reset power, mini HDMI up top to plug it into a television or a capture device, volume there, and all of that stuff does work fine. So we also have some triggers here, L1, L2, R1, R2. They're a little bit awkward in the sense that I'm used to my triggers, you know, bumper here, trigger here, not necessarily like this, but a lot of the games I'm playing don't use them, so it's not really too big of a deal. I do also want to point something out that is a little bit strange to me, and not necessarily disconcerting, but I think it's worth pointing out. When you're holding this thing and you're moving it around, when you shake it or move it, you're going to hear this. There is definitely like a rattle to it, and I can't tell exactly where it's coming from. If I hold the trigger still, it seems to quiet it, so I believe it is the triggers that are rattling. It's not like a huge thing, but it does just kind of like maybe subtract from the fit and finish, the overall feel of the device when you pick it up and it rattles. We also have a couple of LEDs up top that I believe one shows when it's on. I don't actually know what the other one is meant to be doing. And then you have a single speaker on the bottom corner down here. This is a 3.5-inch IPS display. We're running a quad-core ARM Cortex-A9 processor. Nothing super powerful. It's actually a rather old processor, but for running these sorts of games, it's fine. There's only 256 megabytes of DDR3 RAM, but again, for what we're doing, not too crazy. It does come with a 64 gigabyte SD card, but we'll be talking about that here in a minute, and it runs on sort of a weird Linux distribution. In terms of the screen, I actually have no real complaints about this. We'll load up a game really quickly. I'm going to load into a Pokemon game that I think just is, you know, relatively colorful, and I think we'll do a decent enough job of kind of showing this thing off. Let's turn the volume down. And like I said, I think it looks good. Like even off axis, you don't really get any problems at all. The screen is maybe my favorite part of this thing. It just looks really nice. The speaker, though, is one thing that I've had a little bit of an issue with. And the biggest problem I have with it is that I can't seem to dial it in. I'm either slightly too quiet or slightly too loud. And maybe I can kind of demonstrate this a little bit, because I feel like this volume level is too quiet. But when I go up one more, I don't know, it just seems too loud to me now. Maybe I'm just nitpicking. But let's turn it up and let you hear just kind of what it sounds like. We'll take a look here really quickly at their listing. This thing can be bought for $55.99. This is the one that I purchased, and of course I've gone over the specs already. It took a little over 2 weeks to get to me, so keep that in mind, although, you know, as we leave the Christmas holidays and so forth, that may get a little bit better. So this thing does have the ability to quickly go into standby. There's a setting that we're going to look at here in a few minutes, but something I've noticed is that even when it's in standby and then it actually fully shuts down later, I'm still losing a lot of battery while being turned off, not in use. I'm going to bed with, you know, 60, 70% left. Woke up this morning and I was at 10% charge. Definitely did not put it down at 10%. Maybe it was less than 60 or 70, but it was nowhere near 10. So, and this happened a couple times. I'm losing charge pretty rapidly when it's not being used. So keep that in mind. You know, make sure you're saving when you're putting this thing down, because if it goes dead while it's just sitting there, you're probably going to lose some progress that way. So for this next part, we're just plugging directly into a capture card using that mini HDMI. I think this will do a better job of trying to film the screen of showing you guys the user interface. So on the far left, we have game rooms. And this thing is basically full of all these different emulators. You can see what the options are. Of course, I've gone in and I've only got games in certain emulators because I'm to be honest with you, I'm not going to play any vertical arcade games. So I've cleared those things out. And there's a reason that I decided to actually do that. There's no harm in leaving those ROMs in there. But again, I'm going to get back to this. There's a reason that mine are gone. So you pick one of the different emulators and you can then simply load up a game from there. If we go back out, we have favorites, which is something you can do here where, let's say we're going to go into Game Boy Advance and I've been playing Fire Red Omega. So we're going to hit the start button and now that should be in our favorites. You can also go into the history and see what games have been played. My wife was actually trying this out last night and reliving some childhood memories with some of these games, which was quite fun to watch. You also have the ability to search. So let's say I've got a bunch of Pokemon games on here. Well, let's just do that. Type in Poke, and you've got all these things popping up, all these different games. I've got several different ROM hacks on here that I'm playing as well. And you can also favorite things from that menu. Settings, we have the ability to check out the battery's charge level. I'm at 99%. It's been plugged in for the last good while. You can shut it down, change the date and time. There's an I/O test, which basically just allows you to confirm that all of your buttons are in fact functioning. Start and select is how you leave that. You can turn off and on button sounds. So this is kind of funny because it says open and closed. But basically what this means is if it's turned to open, you're going to hear a sound every time you press a button. You can change between different icon sets. So you can see I've changed mine to this one here that I like. You can have Angry Birds, which is fairly strange, but it's there. There are also 4 backgrounds that you can set. I just have mine set to a black background because I just think that looks better. Language settings, scheduled power off, which I think is what I'm talking about here, where it shuts off after so long. So if that's a problem to you, go ahead and put that to close, and I think that should stop that. You can also have it turn off the backlight after a while, change the backlight level. You can also customize the button. So let's say you want B to be A, you can do that there. And then there's ways you can clear different things as well. So let's go ahead and go over to my emulators and let's go to PlayStation 1. And we're going to fire up a game that I think will be, fairly representative of the performance of this thing, which honestly is quite solid. Again, PlayStation 1 and down, it's going to handle really, really well. So we're going to load into Gran Turismo. This was a fairly high-end game, I would imagine. If it can play Gran Turismo with some, decent performance, it's going to be able to play pretty much whatever you're going to want to play. So, of course, this was back before we decided to start using the triggers on controllers to do our acceleration and braking. So we're using B, which will be X on the PlayStation controller. And as you can see here, we're handling this just fine. And honestly, especially on a little 3.5-inch screen, you're going to look at this and feel pretty good about how this actually does look. Boy, I've not played a racing game in a while, at least not one that was not one that isn't Mario Kart. But yeah, the performance is pretty solid on this thing. I'm getting really, really squirrely. As you can see, not the best driver in the world. But yes, the performance is very, very good. Let's hit that menu button, and you can see how this works. So you can exit game, save game, load game, which these are save states. So I could go in and save a state here and pick this right back up exactly where I was. It is saving the state right now. Sometimes this takes a brief second, but there we go. We are saved. Restart CD control. So there's different things you can have for different emulators. And then there are display effects, right? So you can do dot matrix, fast, scan line 1 and 2. So I'll show you what the dot matrix looks like here. And it just kind of, it's meant to simulate, I guess, sort of an older television. So I mentioned my issues with the D-pad earlier, and I think that I can demonstrate them here. And I can't actually figure out if this is a problem with specific games, and I guess I can test this here in a moment. But in this Pokemon game, in any Pokemon game I've tried, this is a problem I have. Let's say I'm going left. I can do that and start going up or down, which I do not want to do because it's very easy to do it, just to very lightly shift, and now suddenly I'm going, it's picking up a diagonal. Now what's strange here is if I start going down, I cannot do the same thing. It only does it when I'm going left and right. And what this, is causing me to do is when I'm in my menu here, I'm jumping around and doing things I'm not meaning to do. I just feel super imprecise using this D-pad in this game. I think one thing I can do here is let's exit this game And let's load up another game and see if we have a similar experience here. Bearing in mind this can only affect games in which you cannot move diagonally, so that's not a lot of games, so keep that in mind. This is Pokemon Yellow on the original Game Boy, and it is giving me the exact same behavior. So if you're playing a game where you can't move diagonal, and it's like this, that might get in your way. Also point out that Game Boy games do not have color. And I know the original Game Boy didn't, but if you remember, the Game Boy Color came out and you could put those old games in, it would kind of give them color. This is not doing that. Now, all that being said, my biggest problem with this device is something that actually happened just the other day. I went to pick the thing up to use it and power it on, and it was completely dead. It just gave me a little battery symbol on the screen. I thought that's odd because it was not dead yesterday, and now it is fully dead. So I plugged it in, charged it up, and then when it booted up, everything was reset. I was in Chinese and my theme was reset. My favorites were gone. I had to go in and reset my language, which you saw the settings on the screen a moment ago. So hopefully if that happens to you, you'll know where the language actually is. It's the second one up from the bottom. And I thought, that was weird, whatever. So I got things going again, played for a little while. Oh, by the way, my save states were also all gone. So all I had was where I saved in the game. So that was a bit of a bummer because I'd lost some progress and some stuff, but whatever. Played some more, saved, put it down. Pick it up later, I'm reset again. My SD card that it came with, I guess it just kicked the bucket. Every time I put it in standby, it was completely resetting everything. So I ended up going to their website, going to my device and downloading the firmware, which is very strangely just in a link to Google Drive. One of them is clickable, one of them isn't. This one gives you an error and takes you nowhere. So I grabbed this one and I pasted it into my address bar, and then I downloaded this RAR file. I then went to win32discimager.org and I flashed that image to a new SD card. Now this one is 128 gigs. It's the only one I had laying around, so I flashed it to that instead. But then the problem was, because this on the SD card, there's multiple partitions, right? So then the problem I ran into was that the ROM's partition was not formatted to FAT32 and would not work. So then I had to go and download this application. You actually download it by clicking on the screenshot. It's a little portable application, and it allows you to format something larger, because FAT32 can only be of a certain size, right? That was my problem. So this let me format that partition as FAT32. I then moved all of my stuff over. I could still plug that, broken SD card into a reader and grab my files from the ROM folder, the ROM partition, and move it over. But when I did this, I didn't move over every single ROM. I only moved over the ones I was going to potentially play. So, some of the, MAME and all, I didn't move those over because I'm not going to use them. So that's why those ROMs were gone. And everything seems now to be okay, but I'll be remiss if I did not point this out. They are very likely using a very, very cheap, very, very not good SD card. And this is something that might happen if you buy this thing. It might be smart of you to go ahead and buy a 64 gig card and maybe use some drive cloning software and just clone it over and use that card from the very beginning to avoid potential problems like what I've had. So all in all, for the price that it is, which is not particularly expensive, $55.99, the performance is solid. Okay, I've not had any performance issues at all. The screen looks good. The buttons are okay. I gotta be honest, that D-pad is a problem for me when I'm going through menus or going to play games where you can't move diagonally like Pokemon. The frequency with which I accidentally go the wrong direction because I ever so slightly was off to the side and it read a diagonal, which it then interpreted to be a cardinal direction. That happens a little bit too much for my liking, and it does frustrate me a little bit. The audio is okay, nothing special, but for what it is, it's fine. The battery life is fine while I'm playing it, but the idle drain is also a little bit of a problem. Luckily, it charges over USB-C. However, I'll also point out that if you're using a higher end charger, I've got several gallium nitride chargers around that when you plug them in, they recalculate what they need to be, what power they should be giving to whatever's plugged in, right? So maybe there's 3 things plugged in, or maybe there's 2 things plugged in, and then you plug in a third one, it's going to recalculate to distribute that power better. This thing just will not charge with those chargers. You have to charge it with a more basic, like an older power brick. All of that into consideration, I think that it is okay. If I was going to give it like a score out of 10, probably like a 6.5, right? Like I'm going by I'm an old school IGN fan from back like 15 years ago. Don't really look at them anymore, but if I'm using the old IGN rubric where 10 is a masterpiece, 9 is amazing, 8's great, 7's good, 6 is okay, we're somewhere between okay and good, right? Like I'm not like wildly impressed with it, but it's solid. It is an okay, almost good device in my book. I do prefer it over trying to play games on my phone. I saw somebody say, just run the emulator on your phone. Well, why do I not do that? The simple answer is buttons. Even buttons that aren't particularly great are better than no buttons at all. Touching a screen, a piece of glass is just no good for me. So in that regard, can I play Pokemon on it? Can I continue to play the games I'm playing on it, A Link to the Past and these things, and enjoy them? Absolutely. I absolutely can do that, and I will continue to do that. So that's pretty much all I've got to say about the Anbernic RG35XX. I'll drop a link to it in the description down below in case you want to check it out yourself. I'll also link to the websites I was talking about, where the firmware is, the disk imager, and the FAT32 formatter thing, in case anybody else runs into that. Maybe that'll save you some time, perhaps. If you're new here, guys, hit that subscribe button on your way out. I'll see you on the next one, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.